increase the number of TV and radio stations they could own. In the 90s, the first true satellite-to-home broadcasting and the first steps toward high definition and digital TV. Over the past 2 decades, we've seen the huge increase in ways and means to get content to mass or to niche audiences. All these and more have changed broadcasting, even the meaning of broadcasting, in profound ways. So here to share their perspectives on what broadcasting in general and in Montana have grown into, allow me to introduce first Linda Gray. You raise your hand. There you go. It'll be hard to tell them apart. Linda Gray, Ron Davis. Which is which?
Thank you for the compliment.
Linda Gray is the president and general manager of Max Media Montana, with headquarters at Missoula and additional TV stations in half a dozen other Montana cities. Linda has more than 3 decades of broadcasting experience in markets across the U.S. Originally from New York State, she began her career in radio in Louisiana in 1980 and moved to TV sales in Norfolk, Virginia in 1983. Ms. Gray managed a number of TV stations in the eastern U.S. before forming her own production house in 2001 to provide content for local TV newscasts. Linda came back to TV broadcasting in late 2002 to help Max Media build a statewide network of stations in Montana. In addition to both management and TV production activities, she has served and still serves in leadership positions on a broad range of business and philanthropic boards, such as the NAB Small Market Committee and the Board of Montana Ambassadors. Ron Davis, here's your cue. Ron Davis is president of Butte Broadcasting and general manager of radio stations KBOW, KOPR, and KGLM. Ron has both Butte and broadcasting in his blood since he started working in Butte radio for Shag Miller while he was still a junior in high school, rising from weekend announcer to general manager over the next 16 years. With his wife Shelley, he bought the radio stations from Shag in 1994, and Ron is now well into his 4th decade in local broadcasting. Ron served for many years on the board of the Montana Broadcasters Association, including 2 years as its president. He's also been active with the National Association of Broadcasters, serving 2 terms on the NAB Radio Board representing Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Among his other philanthropic and community service roles, Ron is also a board member of the Greater Montana Foundation, and last year we joined many others in heartily applauding the news that the NAB had bestowed on his radio station, KBOW, its prestigious Crystal Award as one of America's top 10 radio stations committed to outstanding year-round community service. Please help me welcome both of them. And the floor, as they say, is yours.
Ladies first, so that means I get to go?
I thought I won the coin toss.
Oh, okay,
but,
go ahead.
yeah. Well, Randy was kind enough to suggest some topics that may be of interest to you. So I'm going to touch on a few things that are of that particularly resonate with me, and then there'll be room for some, questions afterwards. I kept threatening Ron, saying, "Okay, I've got a 1-minute intro, and I'm tossing to you, and you've got the whole time." But speaking about corporate ownership, that's really the 1,000-pound gorilla recently in telecommunications industry. He's not necessarily a bad gorilla, but he does require acknowledgement and adapting to the new realities that he presents. So I include in the telecommunications category broadcast radio and TV, the MVPDs, the multi-channel video programming distributors, which currently encompass cable, satellite, telcos, but there is really a lot of other delivery systems that technology is spawning that is introducing some interesting questions to our business. I don't know if it's really filtered down, but an internet-delivered programming service that's trying to circumvent the getting permission from the broadcast networks to broadcast their programming and things like that. But for me, on corporate ownership, the biggest effect is in the area of leverage for stations. While relationships are still important, the need for strategic bulk is critical to survive, let alone thrive in our industry. Some manner of group leverage is instrumental in negotiations with the broadcast networks, with programming syndicators. In the programming syndicators, we buy our talk shows, our game shows, court shows, the off-network syndication. Industry vendors, and probably tied with the networks is equally important is the retransmission consent and carriage negotiations that we conduct with MVPDs, because this has really proved to be a financial lifeline, particularly for small market stations. I'll focus on the impact it has had on my operation, as I believe that my experiences have been similar to what other small market broadcasters are experiencing. I got here at the end of 2002, and it became evident very early in my tenure at Max Media here in Montana that acquiring additional stations, we started with a group that was just Great Falls and Missoula and Butte Bozeman, but that acquiring additional stations to create a statewide footprint was necessary to attain strategic leverage. We also benefited from advances in technology and the government-mandated switch to digital broadcasting in 2009. This digital conversion further expanded our opportunities for strategic bulk by allowing us to affiliate with the ABC network on our digital D1 stations, and then when the former company affiliated with Fox in Montana had financial difficulties and went out of business in 2009, we were able to acquire the Fox affiliation for most of the state and put those on our D2 channels. This growth has positively impacted. Having that statewide footprint has been really critical in all sorts of negotiations and in building our company. It's impacted what we do with programming, news, and locally originated sports. It's enabled us to upgrade and expand local news in our markets that have already produced news. We've added newscasts to the stations that were already doing news, and we added local news to the remaining stations that weren't. Last fall, we added Fox News at 9 p.m., and then in March, we added 5:30 news to our ABC stations in Missoula, Kalispell, Butte, Bozeman. So all of our stations in Montana now have their toes, at least, if not their feet, all the way into news. It has also made it financially viable for our company to produce and air football from Montana State University, and starting last year from the University of Montana as well. We're bringing this fall, and fan me if I faint, we're doing 15 total football broadcasts this fall, 8 UM and 7 MSU. And I'll either be a hero in the middle of November with my company, or I will be on the unemployment line. I don't think there's any in between. It's a pretty pricey endeavor. But local content, that type of thing, it's really important. The news, I've pushed for expanding our news, for introducing new news, for being involved in the sports when other companies have judged it to be not as important to their future. But the local content differentiates us and keeps us relevant. News, sporting events, community affairs all involve a significant investment in personnel and infrastructure. And so just one more point on the leverage. I really see this. I serve on the Fox Board of Governors and a couple committees on NAB, and I see some of my friends in the business who are still single station operators. A friend in Mobile, that's his only station. A girlfriend in Lake Charles, Louisiana, they have 2 small stations in Louisiana, and I really see them struggling. The Mobile station, in the retransmission negotiations with cable, they were off of one of the major satellite distributors for almost a year because they didn't have any leverage really to deal with them. It was like, hey, one station, we'll take the heat. Here in Montana, we got to play a little bit tougher. The companies are much bigger than us that we're negotiating with, but it's like, do you really want to remove Fox and ABC programming from the majority of the state of Montana? And so like I said, the leverage really helps a lot. And so as a result of that, I've seen the single owners operators or the small group owner operators the ranks are diminishing. I mean, there's just not a lot of people, you just have to. I've had people talk to me about, well, what about if we buy this station or whatever, and I don't mean to be pessimistic, but I don't know, at least in television, if you can survive that way anymore. I really don't. So I think you have to have some kind of, if it's not ownership, then alliance or common operation that is going to help you with that leverage. Now, among the differences between operating stations in big markets and small markets, I've worked in top 25, I've worked in middle markets, and then this is really the first time, well, it's been a long time though, for 11 years that I've worked in small markets. And what's really interesting to me, I just have this story that I remember from one of my first tenures on the Fox Board of Governors. And fortunately, I never voiced it, but I used to think, God, those small market guys are whiners. Wow, we got da-da-da-da. Now I'm in a small market, and I'm like, yeah, we are, just because it's really hard. But I think, one of the big differences is the economics of getting to a positive cash flow in a small market. If you think about it, the expense side of the equation isn't that much different. The cost of utilities, the cost of personnel, buildings, leases, operating expenses, at least not proportionately to big markets, but it's very different on the revenue side. In small markets, we are missing several zeros on the end of the revenue numbers, that compensate. So it's a much tougher process to get there. And then to add to that, an even bigger contrast is that between big and small markets, the sheer geography that most small markets cover. A former general manager of ours in Billings would illustrate this by pointing out that the Billings TV DMA, the official marketing area, occupies more square miles than the entire state of Pennsylvania. And I remember hearing that, when I first got here, thinking, wow, that's pretty scary. I was going to say impressive. It's scary. It really is. But our entire state, while the fourth largest geographically, has a population less than the Indianapolis, Indiana market. I'm using that as an example because that is where I was immediately preceding getting here. An Indianapolis station reaches in excess of 1 million people with a single tower and transmitter. In order to do that, to reach the 1 million people in Montana requires towers, transmitters, and offices in at least 7 cities, and a distribution system of dozens of community translators to take our station signals up and down the mountains and, in and out and around, and we're reaching a whole lot of trees and cattle along with the 1 million people that we're trying to reach. The point is, it's so much more effort, expense, maintenance. Our company CEO in Virginia, when I first came out here, he had a philosophy. He was kind of looking at Montana, as we were building the Montana group, as the Montana market. And the flaw in that is, because he was saying, well, if you combine the revenues from all those markets, it's the equivalent, and I can't remember the market that he gave as the example, it's the equivalent of the market revenue of, let's say, well, I can say that when I first got here, my station that I left in Indianapolis actually billed more, that single station, than the entire television revenue in the state of Montana that first year I got here. When I first got, we billed in excess of $40 million in the first year I was in Montana. All the television stations combined in Montana only billed $34 million. So it just really puts it in perspective. But but he was looking at it saying, so I'm looking at it as a big market. I said, yeah, that's great, except there's, one big detail that you're not taking into consideration, and that is the 7 towers and transmitters and offices and, number of people and that it takes to service this, this same entity that you're looking at as one is really, not feasible. And then the third thing that immediately jumps to mind when comparing big markets to small is that our small markets are more often than not, and this was touched on the panel, Norman, your panel earlier today, about that our markets are starter markets or feeder markets, if you will, for on-air and news talent. So We're the trainers, the place where many college grads begin practicing and honing their skills before moving on to bigger pastures, if that's what they want. If we're fortunate enough, we can keep them here. And one strategy I've used in the past when we had somebody that we really wanted and didn't want to lose, and they were single, is find them a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Get them married off, then they won't move. It worked once or twice, But the stations need to have a solid recruitment and retention plan, as just in comparison, it does seem to me that the turnover in these smaller markets, in my experience, is a little bit a higher percentage. Big changes and challenges, negotiating multi-platform rights and how they're conveyed. Used to be you have the rights to this program in your marketing area. Well, now, even like, for instance, in sports rights, we're seeing it more and more as we negotiate with the different rights holders, is that, well, I have the over-the-air linear rights. I don't have the internet streaming rights. I don't have the mobile rights, so forth. So it's getting really tricky. And, the mobile and other handheld devices, as well as iPads and notebooks, have and will increasingly dramatically affect the way that people that consume their news and entertainment, and so it affects our business. And then getting back to the feeder market, attracting and retaining a specialized workforce is a huge challenge. There's some critical positions in our industry that are not the most attractive option for people beginning their careers. And where that really gets critical is the thing that pops to mind is the engineering side of the business. Many, and I think, Monty and folks that are still in the business would acknowledge that most of the broadcast engineers are 60 plus, some 50 plus, and retiring, and there's no funnel. There's no new insurgence of engineering talent to fill that need. And the reason is, if I have an engineering degree, I'm going to go into a more lucrative field. The oil fields, one of the tech companies, and make a lot more money than what a broadcast engineer traditionally makes. And then one of my favorite topics, and I think if we're actually probing this at the NAB Small Market Conference in September, is the intergenerational differences in the workforce. It was pointed out that we're kind of in a unique spot right now because people are working longer, and so we actually have 4 generations of workers in the workplace now, starting from the baby boomers to the X, Y, and millennials. And it impacts not only our recruiting, but it impacts our day-to-day operations. Things like communication style, approach to work, the attitude about work, dress and appearance, individual goals. I think about some of the folks that come in for interviews, and you would think on your first meeting, obviously you want to put your best foot forward. Well, that's not in the psyche. It's really not. I've had people show up for interviews in flip-flops and wrinkled khakis, and it just, you could be Bill Gates, but I can't get to that point to find that out because I'm so put off by your appearance, thinking, why haven't you taken this more seriously? And I try to get beyond that. I mean, I know some people that it's just, okay, 3 minutes and you're done, and I try to probe and get into that a little more, because then if it's somebody who is talented and worth it, you can coach them into some of those things. But they're disadvantaging themselves when they do things like that. And also the emerging workforce, they didn't grow up with TV like we did. And so there isn't a natural attraction to get into broadcasting. They have so many, to them TV is not just broadcast, it's cable, it's what we were talking about, Brody, podcasts and things like that. And so the definition of TV isn't the same to them, and so that provides a challenge. And I think finally, I'm kind of yakking away here.
You're doing good. I'm really happy with it.
I just wanted to say a few words about being a woman in broadcasting. That was one of the items that Randy had mentioned. And not quite. About 33 years ago, I was one of two women that were hired for a radio station in Shreveport, Louisiana. We were the first female media reps in the market. And if you think about that now, it's like, wow, that is really, it just seems so strange because there are a lot of women in the media sales ranks now. In the mid-'80s, when I went into TV, it was estimated that only 1% to 2% of women, of the general managers of all the broadcast stations in the country, and this included public as well, and I think at that time there were 12 or 1,400, only 1% to 2% were women GMs. And I got a chance, I joined, my advantages was, and it's kind of funny because they're bookending my career because I started with them earlier and now I'm back kind of working with the same guys under a different company name, but one of the advantages was when I started in TV in the early 80s, we were just constructing, I mean, ABC, CBS, NBC were dominant. The proliferation of independent TV station signals had not yet happened, yet Fox was not even conceived. And so we were putting on stations at a rapid pace, building and going into different markets at the clip of 1, 2, 3 stations a year. And this company wasn't a huge company, and so it was a matter of, you either got on the train or off the train, didn't matter which, but the train's leaving the station, so you figured it out. You had to figure it out. There wasn't some major training program and some structured plan that you were going through. You had to figure it out. And so being a woman at that time, I did not feel like it had an impact. One of my models was Kay Koplowitz, who was the first female CEO of USA Networks. And I'll never forget, she had a quote in one of the trades and that I cut out and I had on my bulletin board and took it around with me for years till it was a tattered mess and I finally threw it out. And that is, this quote was, "The bottom line is sexless." And I think that's something that, okay, if I can perform, if I can produce results for my company, then that's what it's going to take to succeed. So in preparing for this, I was looking for some current stats on women in the industry. I don't think they exist. I'm wondering too how we would, and Bill, maybe that ties into some of the other research that we talked about doing as far as on the news and all, but I don't have any statistics on how many women in the business. I can say from my observation when I'm at industry events, there are a lot more women involved. I mean, it used to be a room full of suits, and now you can, and you'd see, 1 or 2, bursts of color in a dress or whatever. But now it's more blended. I still think it's if I had to guess, I would say it's not more than 20% though, women in the top roles in our business. So we have come a long way, but it's a long time as well. So, and I don't know why that is. And I just have, this is my ringtone for my boss in Virginia, just to to keep me in line. It's kind of along the lines of get on the train, get off the train, do whatever, your choice. The train's leaving the station. It's a quote from Yoda, from Star Wars. Do or do not, there is no try. And that's kind of, so when I hear that, it's like, oh, it's my boss calling, okay. So on that, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
I'm not Yoda. When I was asked to talk on these subjects, I actually, it was kind of fun for me because I did some retrospect, and I know many of you that know me, this won't surprise you, but I'm kind of a weird duck. I came up in 1979. Sheg Miller gave me the opportunity to work in radio as a high school kid in Butte, and started working there and worked my way through the ranks. When Shag started taking me and grooming me towards doing more at the radio station, I was still quite a young man. And my first broadcasters convention, I was 21 years old and was a program director. And I got to meet the likes of Don Bradley and Mr. Snyder, my good friend now, Jerry Black, Vic Miller. I remember going to the conventions, and I was hanging out with all your kids, but yet was coming up in the industry. And it's kind of been weird for me because I'm in a tweener age, because many of you were deep into your careers and I was the kid. And even when I went on the board, my first year on the Montana Broadcasters Board, I was 26 years old. I was the first president of the Montana Broadcasters to become a father, at least knowingly, while being president of the association. My son Austin was born, my daughter Maggie was born while I was serving as president of the association. I took over the association as president because of Black Friday in Butte, when Bob Precht shut down his Butte offices and moved them to Bozeman in a very not so cool way. And because he got negative press from the MTN network, still at that time the MTN network, he resigned from the Montana Broadcasters, and I was the newly elected vice chair, and so served the next 2 years as the president of the association at 28 years old, 29 years old. So it was very young. I was getting the opportunity. The interesting part is, though, I had some amazing mentors, and I had the opportunity to learn this industry from the legends. An example, on my 30th birthday, we were here in Helena, and we used to meet at the Governor's Club downtown, or the Governor's Room downtown, and they found out it was, Judy Reddy and Bob Haney found out it was my 30th birthday, so during lunch they snuck in a cake. Well, then I'm sitting there on the table, and Dan Snyder and Don Bradley, you remember when we were 30, we put our first TV on? And Bob Haney saying, well, I went to work for Tom Judge when I was 30, and turn around, and everybody's giving what they did at 30. Well, on the way home from Helena, I called my wife, and remember cell phones then were about the size of a brick, weighed like a brick, and plugged into your cigarette lighter because the batteries were, I called my wife driving through Elk Park and said, I'm going to go talk to Shag about buying his radio stations. After listening to what all these guys did at 30, I can't let 30 go by without doing something. Walked back into the radio station, walked into Shag's office and said, I'd like to talk to you about buying your radio stations. Shag, in his infamous, always with the glasses, it's about goddamn time, Davis. I'm thinking, damn, I'm 30. I don't even know if somebody's going to give me the money, and you think it's time? But it was because of being with these legends and listening to them, and I learned that broadcasting is service to your community. And I learned an old school approach to broadcasting, that it was all about the license you serve, and Shag Miller instilled that in my mind, and we did a lot of Shag was a journalist first, and then a broadcaster, because Shag actually got his degree from the University of Montana School of Journalism and was a newspaper writer and salesman when he accidentally fell into radio. And so I was taught the journalism approach, make sure the details, make sure the facts, those type of things, and that's how I was brought up in the broadcast industry. But more than anything was serve the community you're licensed to. And that was instilled in me, but working with Jerry Black and Ron Cass was a major mentor. Whenever I got in a situation, I'd go talk to Cass, which I know that might scare the hell out of some people in this room, but he was a dear friend and still is a very dear friend. And actually, when Shag and I were going through the purchase part of the station, came a point where Shag got seller's remorse, didn't want to sell. And Ron and I went to lunch weekly then, and he said, well, tell you what, I'll take care of that. And I said, what? And he said, when you go back to work, just say you had lunch with me. Shag calls me later and says, so Cass offered you a job, huh? You're going to work for Cass? Well, you can't. You're buying my stations. Well, Shag, you changed your mind. No, we're going to finish this. And that's how the deal got done. It's kind of a typical Ron Cass smoothness, So, but I want to give you that because I started out, we took over ownership. Interesting, the day we bought the radio stations, my wife and I were expecting our second child. The stress of closing that day sent Shelley into labor a week early. We signed the papers in the father's waiting room. We were scheduled to close at 2 o'clock. Our son was born at 1:51. Shelley signed at 2:15 in the room they moved her into, and jokingly said, I guess if this doesn't work, I can always claim to rest. 3 months later, we had to re-sign everything because of that. kind of gives you a retrospective. So we stepped in, we started going, and that's how we hit the ground. My son's first trip home from the hospital, he came to the radio stations that we had just purchased the day before. So it was, and like my son, I liken my son to our radio stations. We've watched them both grow. They've both had growing pains. They've both been issues. They've both eaten a lot, but they've both given back a lot. And our son, is 6'7" and 240 pounds, and the station sometimes feels more than that. But they've both been labors of love. I bring you through that because it was not right after 1994 that we bought the radio stations. That 1996, the Broadcast Cable Act, all of a sudden here comes deregulation. And deregulation hit the industry. Now keep in mind, when we bought the radio stations, there was no FCC user fees. There was, a very, very limited ownership. So if you owned, well, I'll give you, 12, 12, 12. If you owned 25, 26 stations, you were huge. I remember top 50 people of power in radio, Larry Roberts was listed in the top 40 because he owned at the time 18 stations. And it's only because the number of stations you own is how you were power in the industry. Well, all of a sudden the doors open up. And I remember 1996 like it was yesterday. I went to the National Association of Broadcasters convention. It was right after this all came out, and Lowry Mays and some other people that were really the pushers of deregulation were on the stage. I'll never forget the comment, and I called my wife afterwards and said, I think we need to sell, because they said it's time to run the mom and pops out of this industry. It's time to get the mom and pop podunk radio off the air, create quality music and quality programming for everyone, so everybody in the country deserves that kind of programming. And the moms and pops need to get out. And they told us that at the keynote address at the National Association of Broadcasters meetings in Las Vegas. But being the stupid Butte kid that I am, I said, okay, we're going to prove you wrong. And I'll get to why in a minute where I'm going with that. But so we came back, we worked through that, and you had a lot of offers and you had a lot of people coming trying to buy your stations. And at that time, before then, we bought the stations from Shag Miller at about 6 times cash flow. Well, within 2 years, I'm looking at offers at 10 times cash flow. And so I can make a quick profit here. I could get out and go do something else. But at the time, I'm 37, 38 years old. What am I going to do? So you stick around. Well, as time went on, deregulation took over. The large corporates started creating cooker-cutter radio, I call it. They'd say, okay, this is our format. We're going to program it in Boise, and all of our stations in the region are going to play the same announcers and the same music. If you're listening to a station in Boise, and this is Clear Channel, or you listen to a station in Bozeman, it's the same announcer, same thing, but we're going to have little buttons they'll push that will cut in voice track liners for said stations. And the whole idea of quality programming for all, cutting expenses because we overpaid for our stations, began. And the demise of radio as we know it, in my mind, began. Because went away from serving the community, went away from doing things that were important to the community and going to this investor-driven broadcast industry that radio became for a long time, and still in some ways is still there. But through all that, it was kind of interesting. For about the first 5 to 6 years, all the conversation was about getting the mom and pops out and all the money that was going to be offered. Well, then the cash calls started coming for these large corporations, and they couldn't make them. So then you started going to the broadcast conventions, and they'd start having sessions on how to sound local, how to be local, because they'd tried this cookie cutter thing and it wasn't working. In the meantime, the independent broadcasters, the small market broadcasters, we were doing the things that we always did, the mom and pops that were doing podunk radio per Lowry Mays. We just kept serving our communities and kept doing what was important to the town that we're in. One of the key drawbacks to radio and in the changes thing that I saw was you went to the preset music format. You can listen to a hot country in Billings, and a hot country in Butte, and a hot country in Missoula, and hear the same song at the same time if you could listen to all 3 markets at the same time, because they're all buying the same syndicated music. At the same time, the networks used to be your franchise. You're a CBS affiliate, you were the CBS franchise. Nobody else could have CBS, they were yours. We've been with CBS since 1948. And what happened in the meantime now is if you're not clearing something, somebody else in your market's going to get it. Well, not just that, as I watched the NCAA tournament last year and listened to it on our radio stations, they're constantly telling the network, my listeners, to go to their web stream to listen to the game. Wait a minute, you're on my station using my time to tell people to leave me to go listen to your game. And so now all of a sudden our networks became our competition. And that has made it tougher, especially since some of the major corporations are owning the networks or have a big stake in the networks. So it's changed the whole realm of how I grew up in radio and how I was taught radio. All of a sudden we're competing with ourselves, really. The other part of that was interesting is, and the FCC, under Bill Clinton's guidance and leadership, decided that they were no longer going to keep as many people on the streets to go out and make sure the broadcasters were doing things right. Instead of making their money from fines, which by the way they're back to now, but instead of that they were going to charge user fees. So stations had to pay for the right to be governed by the Federal Communications Commission. It's really what it was. The bad part about that is my stations in Butte, Montana pay the highest fees in the entire state of Montana. Because of the size of our coverage, because of the size of our signals, our license size, we pay more than any other stations in the state of Montana in radio for our user fees. But I pay the exact same amount in user fees as a station in New York City. They're charging $300 an ad, I'm charging $14 an ad. But I have to pay the same fees. When they were first introduced, they were about $1,600. Now I pay well over $6,000 in FCC user fees for the right to have the FCC govern me. So it's another of the changes to me that really changed our how we had to approach business as well, on the idea that you have these outside people with their hand out trying to take what you're working hard to get. So the other changes, we talked about the deregulation, but something else happened around that time that a lot of people never paid attention to. And it's really something that I feel Ed Craney would have been very interested in, that is the introduction of the low-power FM, LP-FM stations. Because all of a sudden, broadcasters are doing this huge corporate cookie-cutter approach to radio. There was a push to create community 100-watt stations. Now, in Montana, they didn't become such a big thing. The infamous one is Hardin, but that's for a whole different reason, because he basically became a pirate radio. But in the bigger cities, they put in these 100-watt stations, and every religious group could have one, schools could have them, different people could have them, and they were going to do the local stuff that the broadcasters were no longer doing. And during that transition, the battles, and I was very involved in those as an NEB rep at the FCC. I testified, I worked on it, but they were going to stop third channel adjacent protection for FM radio stations and allow low power FMs to be on second channel adjacent. So, for example, in Butte, we could have 33 low power FM radio stations. We fought hard to block that, but what came out of that in the long run, they're supposed to be non-commercial, they're supposed to be doing, if you've ever listened to any of them, they're a commercial broadcast entity. The gentleman in Hardin actually owned a newspaper and owned the low power FM that he was selling commercials on, and the other FCC rule there was you couldn't have radio, newspaper cross ownership. He was on the air for 6 years before the FCC finally took him off the air, because the FCC wasn't doing their job. But those are that was something that really hurt radio in my mind, because it allowed those people that weren't doing local coverage to continue not to do local coverage. And that really hurt radio as an industry. That and the music and playing the same music has really devastated the radio industry in my mind. It's starting to come back. I know at our stations, we have our own music programming. We have committees that program our stations. Every song that goes on the air in our stations is discussed. We don't buy, we do provide or have a music service, but only to provide us the music that we need. They don't program it, we do. And I think more and more radio stations are going back to that. More and more stations are saying, okay, we're not going to buy Dial Global's traditional country, we're going to do it our own way. We actually have programmers we program our music to Butte. If you listen to the copper format in Butte, it's nothing like any other format you'll hear in the country. It's a singer-songwriter-based folk rock type station. Unbelievable ratings, very good, solid audience. Other than the idiot on the mornings, it's a good show. But it's really, that's where I think radio has to go to get back to what radio needs to do. Going back to wearing hats, and there was some discussion about wearing hats. I go in every morning at 6 o'clock as the morning announcer on KOPR. I'm on the air until noon. I'm the chief engineer. I do all the engineering work, repairing transmitters, doing those things. I have a cell phone in my pocket that's just my engineering phone. I can repair all my transmitters or get them back on the air or switch them from that phone wherever I am in the world. I also do a local talk show. I sell, and every once in a while I get to go home. But I'm not the only one. My staff all does that. My staff does many, many things, and they do many things because they believe in doing it the way we do it, live, local, and for our community of license. And I think that whole transitioning back to, going to the cookie cutter, getting mom and pop out, I think the industry's coming back to where the local has to come back, and it's coming back. And I'm seeing it more and more. Part of the problem I have, going to the corporate comment, the problem with the corporates is the corporates would come in, they overpaid for the stations. They'd get rid of the high-ticket people. The high-ticket people would leave. You had somebody that was being paid a lot of money, and you'd take the next warm body and say, you're now the general manager. And I've seen this, and I'm not going to, well, I'll just say it because it's the way I am. I see this even in our association, that the young general managers that have come up that are now serving on the board of directors, say of a Montana Broadcasters Association, they don't have a stake, they don't have a buy-in. They're happy to have that on their resume. And I see a lack of true oversight of our industry. And the idea that we are the protectors of our industry, we are the people that have to make sure our industry is doing it right. And the fact that it's not there. And we need to get back to that. And we need to make sure that the people that are supposed to be watching out for our industry are doing so. And that's something that I have a real concern about. And it's something I sat on many Montana Broadcasters meetings and as an ex officio, and I sat there thinking, wow, you people need to stand up. This is our association. This is our industry. You need to speak out. You can't just sit here and say, okay, whatever. You need to be accountable. You need to do what's best for the industry. And that's where we got to get back to. And that's, I think, where the industry as a whole needs to get back. That's the change I see for our industry, is the ownership. The owners, be it myself, be it Chad Parrish, Jim Sense, in this case from TV, your true state manager is the owner. And in Linda's case, I see her as the owner of her company. We need to all re-engage on what our industry is doing in our state and be a part of that to make it better. And that's really that's something that's going to drive me for the next few years, is to get back to that. So, I think I had a couple other quick notes here, and then I'll shut up. The next big drive for us, everybody talks to me, every time I talk to them, they say, what about satellite? What about Pandora? What about, studies have been made in the last year and a half, numerous studies, that people that use Pandora listen to local radio more than they did before Pandora. People that are listening to internet radio, when something's happening in their community, you're still going back to radio. Radio is a growing industry. We're not dying. Last year we rose by 2.4% in income. This year it's scheduled to be 2.9%. Last year we had a great year financially thanks to TV. Because, many of us in radio have always known that when it's political time in TV, all that money's going to TV for political, and those other local advertisers are going to switch the budget. They're not going to compete with the political. They're going to come and spend money on TV. And that's where we really don't get as much as the political, as much as we get the local advertiser who's left TV during the political window. They return, but it's a good influx of a capital for radio. But the concept of the internet, we've embraced it, and we're actually, I'm an idiot. I'll tell you right now. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I understand. I don't Facebook. I don't do it because life's way too visible and way too easy for people to look at. I don't need more people watching me. But I'm eventually going to have to do that. I'm going to have to give up my stubbornness. But our stations do. And for example, I showed some of you pictures. John David sitting in our smokers lounge. Well, our morning show on KBOW created the KBOW Lounge. It has a petting zoo, it has a putt-putt emporium. We have an old bowling center with kids standing up pins. It's all theater of the mind, back to what radio is supposed to be. We have sound effects. We have pictures of people in smoking jackets with crushed velvet chairs and pipes sitting in our studios. And that's our Facebook, that's the way we created our Facebook, to try to create fun. And we can drive people to those sites using our radio. And I know I'm almost done here, I apologize. The big push has been, we drive people to those sites. We can drive what we're doing there because we're on the radio telling those listeners as they're getting ready to work that, in the Smokers Lounge this morning, we have your membership card, and if you get your membership card, you get 10% off of Pork Chop John's on a sandwich today. Well, they're going to go sign up and then check the calendar you was there, because you'll find other savings that your membership card, looks like a credit card from the Smokers Lounge, will get you. And so it's just fun stuff. We have fun with it. And lastly, we were embracing the internet, embracing the things that we can do there to do something different. We're a sports stations driven hard. We're very, very sports minded. The Montana Standard announced they were going to put us out of business. Their goal was to take all of our business away. And so to accept the challenge, we hired all three of their sports writers, Bill Foley, Bruce Saylor, and Pat Ryan, away from them, created buttesports.com. And we've only been, it'll be a year in August, and we created buttesports.com with those writers, and we take pictures, and when we're doing the games, we say, by the way, you can catch the whole byline of the game, box scores, and interviews with the coaches and players on buttesports.com right after the game. We get, on average now, we're averaging about 2,600 unique visits a day. We have over 1,400 people following us on Twitter, and our Facebook page is, I can't even tell you the number, it's unbelievable. But we created a free online sports page and hired all their writers to work for us. And the gentleman who was going to put me out of business is no longer with the IR, and we're still here. So, but embracing the internet is going to be important, but not looking at it as a competition, but as an opportunity. So I'm sorry I talked to them.
When we brought these folks along, I knew that this was going to be a good session, but I didn't know it was going to be this good. I mean, this is absolutely very good. I'm sitting there, and I mean, I'm saying this is some meaty stuff. This is stuff that we can chew on, not just among ourselves here, but you have laid some powerful stuff on the table, both of you. And Linda, Ron, thank you very much. We have some lovely parting gifts for you, so thank you for that. And one more round of applause for you.
Oh, thank you.
All right, I think we have three more gentlemen who are about to come up, and we'll go right into the next session. We will have a short break after this session, and then we'll have our final session of the day. We should be out of here by about 4 o'clock this afternoon. And by this time, you know the drill. Do the queenly wave. All right. Another area that deserves our study and discussion is the rise over the past 40 years of public radio and television across Montana. Three gentlemen have significant experience in public radio, TV, and civic broadcasting, the latter being the Montana version of C-SPAN. William Marcus is the Director of Broadcast Media and Station Manager of KUFM Public Radio and KUFM TV at Missoula. William received his BA in Radio TV from the University of Montana Journalism School in 1974, a vintage year for radio TV graduates. He started his professional career in 1975 as a production assistant for KUFM Radio and has held a variety of positions with the station during his 38-year tenure. Marcus was appointed director of the Broadcast Media Center in 1996. In addition to his radio work, he has served as executive producer for 4 regional Emmy Award-winning television documentaries and is certainly best known for his great hosting of the popular PBS TV program Backroads of Montana. And William, as you may know, my stepmother is your biggest groupie, and fair warning, she has some story ideas she's coming to you with. Aaron Pruitt is the general manager of KUSM in Bozeman and director of content for Montana PBS. A Bozeman native, he's been with public media his entire career, starting even before his graduation at MSU 19 years ago. He's directed PBS TV programming now since 1997, and the Greater Montana Foundation is well aware of Aaron's extraordinary excellence in production of impactful programs for all Montanans. 11th and Grant with Eric Funk, Class C, Butte, America, the Fort Peck Dam story, and so many, many more. Aaron brings them to the screen with sincerity, panache, and great storytelling ability. Steve Malley is TV Montana's Special Projects Manager. TV Montana, TVMT, is the umbrella feeder for a large and growing number of community access channels statewide. If you watched any of the gavel-to-gavel or committee coverage of the last Montana legislature, that was courtesy of Steve and TVMT. Originally from Omaha, Nebraska, Steve arrived in Montana in 1982, following graduate school at Johns Hopkins University in Washington, D.C. With an advanced degree in U.S.-Canadian relations, he said, "What better place to go than a state that abuts 3 Canadian provinces?" Among other roles, he's been a state legislative research analyst who wrote the 1999 report on the feasibility of televising the legislature, and 2 years later, he authored the bill that was passed by the Montana legislature that made it so. In the past few years, you may have seen him hosting the TV public affairs program Global Positioning, and he gives the Ed Craney studio and its high-def field cameras a great and continuing workout in projects for the Montana Historical Society, Helena Civic TV, and other agencies. Please welcome all 3 gentlemen.
Thank you, Randy. And as public broadcasters, I think we're especially appreciative of being included in the family of broadcasting in Montana. We are here to complement the service of the commercial entities that serve Montana so well. And we'd like to talk a bit about where we came from, what we try to do for the state, and answer any questions that you have. Most radio stations in the country started in the physics department in colleges or at corporations because they were a physics experiment. But they turned to institutions like universities to have the Glee Club come in and sing or have a professor talk on the air. It was very much an educational beginning in a lot of ways. In 1967, the federal government decided to make a formal entity of public broadcasting in Montana, or in the United States, that was centered around all of the educational services that had sprung up, educational TV, and many of these remaining university radio stations. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting was formed in 1967, and at the signing ceremony in 1967, LBJ said, "This corporation, CPB, will assist stations and producers who aim for the best in broadcasting good music, in broadcasting exciting plays, and in broadcasting reports on the whole fascinating range of human activity. It will try to prove that what educates can also be exciting. It will get part of its support from the government, but it will be carefully guarded from government or from party control. It will be free, and it will be independent, and it will belong to all of our people. At its best, public television would help make our nation a replica of the old Greek marketplace, where public affairs took place in view of all the citizens. E.B. White also had a great quote about public broadcasting.
This was E.B. White writing to the Commission as they contemplated the creation of public broadcasting. Non-commercial TV should address itself to the idea of excellence, not the idea of acceptability, which is what keeps commercial TV from climbing the staircase. I think TV should be providing the visual counterpart of the literary essay, should arouse our dreams, satisfy our hunger for beauty, take us on journeys, enable us to participate in events, present great drama and music, explore the sea and the sky and the woods and the hills. It should be our Lyceum, our Chautauqua, our Minskys, and our Camelot. It should restate and clarify the social dilemma and the political pickle. Once in a while it does, and you get a quick glimpse of its potential.
We have lofty aspirations, I guess. And I believe that in the work that we do in the state, that occasionally you do get a glimpse of that greatness, and we're proud of the work we do. I'd like to start by talking a bit about Montana Public Radio, which began in 1965. Nathaniel Blumberg, who was the dean of the School of Journalism, hired a young Chicago native who was teaching in South Dakota to come and form a radio station. KUFM went on the air in 1965 as a 10-watt student training facility to help students learn what it was like to be on the radio. The station remained at 10 watts for many years. People would drive to the campus, because that's really the only place you could get it, to listen to the Metropolitan Opera on Saturdays. Then in about 1973, 2 or 3 things happened. The power was increased. Terry Conrad, another Chicago native, was hired to be the program director, and KUFM became an NPR member station, qualified by CPB. Incidentally, they had to have 5 full-time people, and I had just graduated, so I was in the right place at the right time. The station grew in 1976. We put on our first translator, thanks to Ed Craney. It was in Butte on XL Heights. In 1979, we expanded into Helena. 1984 into Great Falls. At 1984, the university also formed the Broadcast Media Center at UM, which took KUFM out of the School of Journalism and formed it as a public service entity, and added video production as well. So there were people now involved in both radio and television at that time. The radio station continued to grow in 1994 through 97 with expansions and major transmitters, and our latest transmitters were installed in Libby and in Polson in 2011. We now have 8 full-power transmitters. The station in Polson is KPJH for Philip J. Hess. So, KEMC in Billings, much the same kind of history. 1972 went on the air as a 10-watt station. Between 1978 and 89, made advancements with the great assistance of Joe Sample, and now covers the largest area of any public radio system in America, with an enormous system of translators and transmitters. They're housed at the Joe Sample Studios on the MSUB campus, and the 2 services, Montana Public Radio and Yellowstone Public Radio, serve the entire state of Montana. As Aaron will explain, public television started somewhat along the same way, but didn't develop quite the same way in the end.
In fact, William mentioned the Broadcast Media Center in '84, and actually that was kind of, in a way, the beginning, because both the Broadcast Media Center at the University of Montana and the Visual Communications Building were authorized at the same time as structures to be built on both campuses. And so they were completed in '84, which happened to be the year I started the university at Montana State University. And at that time, public television, the only existence of public television in the state was on cable. And if you were in the Bozeman area or in Billings, you would have been seeing KUED out of Salt Lake City, public television. And it was only on cable, it was not over the air. So the first over-the-air signal came in Bozeman with the call letters KUSM, again, with great assistance from Joe Sample, who provided an antenna and transmitter for us to place on top of the South Hedges dormitory at Montana State University. That antenna is still there, although it's not operating anymore. It did operate at a somewhat reduced power. It can be concerns about radiation issues for the students that are right below them. But that was our transmission facility for more than a decade, KUSM in Bozeman. It was started also by a key number of people. Ed Gruenhout, some of you would have known, Jack Kippa, I'm sure a number of you know, Nancy Flickema, actually one of my neighbors out on the Four Corners area, really wanted over-the-air free public television, particularly for the children's programming that was not available to people in the rural areas, Sesame Street namely. And so they came together and started the first Friends of Montana PBS board in 1984, and with Joe Sample's help, we put up a transmitter. But to start a public television service and to have the appropriate staff and all of the facilities to do it, the only way it was possible was with some help from KUED out of Salt Lake, and they were extremely gracious in helping us get off the ground on and onto our own feet. So for the first 3 years of our existence, from '84 to '87, we were simply retransmitting KUED programming and content, because KUED was a full PBS member station. We were not. We didn't have the resources to be a full PBS member station. And KUED and Fred Esplin down there in Salt Lake really thought it was important that Montana have its own public television station, believed in that strongly, and it's really due to their, I mean, they could have easily made it very difficult for us to ever get started with public television in Montana, but instead, they helped us. They did our broadcast logs for us initially, and they helped us get on our feet so that by 1987, we were eligible to apply to become a PBS member station and to apply for a CPB grant. And so in '87 is when we became a full PBS member station, KUSM again in Bozeman. TCI Cable, some of you remember back long ago, they were also very helpful to the early stages of public television and carried us in distant markets and Billings and other cities around central and in eastern Montana so that we reached a lot more folks around the state. And we were KUSM as our callers. That's kind of how we branded ourselves in those days. We eventually turned into Montana Public Television. And then in 1996, we then partnered up with KUFM, who was building a television station in Missoula, and became Montana PBS. And I'll let William tell the story of how that got started.
Let me back up just a bit and talk about the competition of the two universities, which we all know about. KUSM was on the air in Bozeman, and the then director of the Broadcast Media Center in Missoula wanted to have a broadcast entity as well. The cable history in Missoula had been with KSPS from Spokane in Kalispell and Missoula and Hamilton. So the director of the Broadcast Media Center went to KSPS and tried to broker an arrangement where we would have local origination capability on the KSPS signal that was in the Missoula Valley. Jack Hippa heard about this plan and thought that that was a really bad idea. And I don't think Jack thought it was a bad idea because he didn't want the competition. I think he knew that it was a really bad idea because Montana just isn't big enough to support two really good public television stations. He took it to the Board of Regents and asked the board to mandate a consolidated approach to public broadcasting in Montana, which they did. And what has happened since is the growth of a single Montana PBS system that serves over 440 communities in Montana, that has transmitters or digital translators in the 7 major cities, transmitting 5 digital channels, with a station in Missoula that has primarily producers, a staff of 4 or 5 very talented folks, and a station in Bozeman that has the technical center, the staff, and also talented producers. So,
And it's a partnership. I mean, we worked very hard in 1997. I think, you know, you signed on in 1997 in Missoula, and we established at that time, which was very unique between the two universities, a document of a partnership agreement between the two stations. And in the end, we had the university presidents both sign that document. And it was, in those days, one of the first examples of the two universities working together collaboratively on a project and calling it Montana PBS and agreeing on how we would share funds, how we would share the CPB grant, how we would share Friends revenues from our pledge drives. And it was groundbreaking for us, both stations, and it was groundbreaking for our administrations as well.
and groundbreaking for the country in a lot of ways. We've emerged not only as a model for inter-university cooperation, but many stations have now adopted a more efficient cooperative model that we've been doing since 1997.
In some large metropolitan markets that you may have been to, you may be aware that you can see 2, 3, sometimes more public television stations in a particular market. And during federal funding crises, sometimes those, some might call inefficiencies, that competition amongst public television, has been a real difficulty for the system to grapple. And one of the things we've not had to really worry about in Montana, because we're pretty highly efficient and we can put our resources to local programming, and that's what we really do.
And that emphasis on local programming comes not only from that efficiency, but it comes from, at least in my part, from the legacy of the competition with KSPS in Spokane, which is a wonderful public television station. I don't mean to disparage them, but we were in competition with them when we came on the air or on cable in western Montana. And as I told the staff of KUFM TV, that if we were going to prove that the investment of state dollars and membership dollars from Montanans was worth this, what seemed to be perhaps a duplicative effort, we had to prove that we were a Montana service. We had to put Montana on television. The faces and the stories of Montana had to be on TV. And that's not to say commercial television doesn't do that, but we could do it in a different way, in a more long-form way. And in many ways, it really has been the emphasis to make sure that we are responsible to Montanans and that we continue to do Montana programming.
We've had so much success in doing it with programs like Class C and Butte America. We have a new project, Charlie Russell, that William will tell a bit more about, and some of you have already heard about. But telling local stories for Montana, which clearly our Montana audience loves, whether it's Backroads or Ag Live, or you name it. But a number of those programs, the beauty of public television and the way we're structured in public television is that we share these local stories on a national level. Some of you, I shared with you the Indian Relay project that we are now just finishing, a 1-hour documentary on Indian relay racing on the reservations in the Rocky Mountain West. It's a fascinating story. And we will be sharing it with the national PBS audience in prime time in November, so that people all across this country will see what a race and a fascinating sport, a highly dangerous sport, but they're going to learn about it in New York to Miami to California, and it's just a fascinating film. And that's kind of what a neat thing about public television. We take local stories and we take them national when they are a strong enough story to be compelling for national audiences.
The advent of digital television has really added to what we are able to provide. And I remember sitting in hearings in this building back in the early 2000s with the digital mandate, talking about the promise of digital television and the multi-channel ability, and that someday we would be broadcasting the proceedings of the legislature. We didn't know how the hell we were going to do that, but it was the possibility that we could do that, that we could provide more than just one single channel. That was really incredibly exciting. And to have that on-air service, as Greg mentioned earlier today, 20% of homes in Montana still watch primarily, if not singularly, over-the-air television. And people still don't understand that with rabbit ears, which people, you tell them to buy a pair of rabbit ears and they think you're just out of touch, that they can get all of those channels it really amazes people. So, do you want to talk about the rise of
Yeah,
TVMT?
thanks, Win. That's a great segue, mentioning the multicasting ability of Montana PBS. That's kind of where TVMT comes in. Before I tell you my story, my task is to tell you about a different form of public television. It's an anomaly with respect to all the things you've been talking about last night, today, and even just now. I feel like a little bit like an agitated guppy, in a sea of venerable groupers, I'm excited about that. And before I get into the details, I expected to learn quite a bit at this symposium last night, today. I figured, I looked at the schedule or the agenda and thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. I'm in television, sort of. Definitely in media and interested in all these things. But I have to tell you, I didn't expect not only to learn as much as I have done from the first minute till just a moment ago, but I find this inspiring in so many ways. And what I want to say to all the folks who have presented before me, with nothing but compliment in mind, is you make me feel so young. I'm no spring chicken. Everybody knows that, but I have large aspirations, and in order to fulfill them, I'm going to have to go into kind of a fast-forward mode here in the next couple of decades. But what fuels the fire is the stories I've heard today and last night, and they're almost all news to me, but very inspirational. There's so much to draw from, including incredible humor. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what TVMT is, and then I'll tell you how it came to pass. And it's a short story compared to everything else you've been dealing with today. TVMT is a brand, Television Montana. It's a brand created by a hyper-local community access, nonprofit television station here in Helena called Helena Civic TV. There are hundreds of community access, cable access stations around the country. Most of them are small. Almost all of them are failing, if they haven't failed already. A lot of them are not very popular because what cable access is all about is freedom to express oneself. It's free speech television. It's on cable, and I won't get into the arcane world of how it came to pass through federal legislation. There's no federal money in it, I'll guarantee you there's no money in it. But free speech TV, that invites a lot of interesting characters all over the country to the microphone, to the camera. I'll tell you, we very deliberately in the early years, and Marty Bauman's back in the room, he's a founding member of HCTV as well. We deliberately chose the title Helena Civic TV, and it's paid off because it has enabled us to sort of pursue a track of programming that is unlike most community access programming in the United States. TVMT is just one of our two streams of traffic, and we are dedicated to local coverage. We are under contract to local governments to cover every city commission, school board meeting, county commission meeting, all kinds of things like that. And not just government. On our own volition, we cover all kinds of arts and cultural events. And we're very much dedicated to serving the capital city community. And that, again, puts us apart from many other community stations in that, we are in the capital city, and we've capitalized on that. And TVMT is a consequence of that. I'm going to spare you my personal history about working for the legislature, writing the bill, and ending up here in the basement, producing the stuff. But we saw the opportunity to mimic C-SPAN at the state level. We're not unique in that way. There are about 16, 17 states that have dedicated television coverage of their respective legislatures and other agencies of government. We are the only one in the United States that's a local community access station with a statewide mandate and a statewide reach. And we're happy to be that kind of an anomaly. TV Montana, there's a slogan, invented a slogan, and I'm sticking to it because it works. Our slogan is we're uniting people and government through the power of television. I think it's safe to say that the power of television is something you know more about than I do, but it's still vital. I mean, TV's not going away. It's powerful. There's a huge reservoir of cynicism about government. There's a lot of indifference across the country about state and local government, state in particular. There's a huge demand now for transparency as a way to kind of see through, how laws are made, who's making them, who's paying for it, legally or illegally, in the light of day or in the dark. So that's what our real mission is, to make government transparent. And happily, in Montana, we have a very special constitution that has provisions for the right to know and the right to participate. We believe we're actually helping to fulfill constitutional requirements in Montana. I've gone to the legislature year after year after year, and it's finally sunk in that TVMT is the single most effective tool the citizen legislature has to demonstrate its legitimacy to the general public. People who watch our programming, and we don't have any scientific measure of who they are and how many they are, and we just get a lot of positive feedback, let's put it that way. They're watching these citizen legislators at work. Before these proceedings were on television, they didn't think anybody was doing any work up here. They were messing around with people's lives, passing strange laws, regulations. Now they're a witness to how much work it takes these elected people to reach any kind of conclusion, let alone a successful bill that the governor will sign in the end. We do serve other branches and agencies of government and provide the same sort of benefits. The state Supreme Court, we go there for oral arguments from time to time. We work for the governor's office from time to time when they have special training, like uniquely in Montana, tribal relations training for all state employees. We put that on TV. We actually serve up on television the Board of Regents meetings, which are produced by Montana PBS, but Montana PBS doesn't have any place to put what I would call extremely long-form programming. I mean, you guys in the commercial media, you know about sound clips and sound bites and tight time frames. PBS has fairly conventional frames to work within, half hour, and there's more precise numbers than I'm using there. We are long form or really short or somewhere in between. It depends on what's going on, because we are reality television, genuinely, the real thing. Almost everything you see on TVMT is unedited. It's gavel to gavel. You know when it's going to start. You never know when it's going to end. That makes programming TVMT a challenge, I'll say that. We do reach, let's put it this way, we're accessible to over 90% of the population of the state through 55 cable stations, through over-the-air digital broadcasts thanks to Montana PBS's multicasting capabilities, and a constant stream free to all public schools through the Office of Public Instruction. So we really are out there. And I do want to speak a little to the relationship we have with Montana PBS, because I think it too is unique in the United States. I don't know of any other community access station, small nonprofit, that has this kind of complementary, mutually beneficial, I believe, relationship with a major league public television station. And so together, I think, you all know how about the high quality, highly produced programmings on PBS nationally and in Montana. I know about them too because I love them too. I watch them all the time. This other form of programming is increasingly important to people, because I think today especially people are gravitating to what really matters to them. Their neighbors really matter to them, the government really matters to them, the law really matters to them, and I find it kind of paradoxical that with the proliferation of dozens, hundreds of cable channels available in the household, research shows that most people don't watch more than a dozen of them routinely. And I'm convinced, and I can only assert this because I can't prove it, that people, if they're flipping through their cable, they're going to land on something that matters to them. And that's the magic of our soup, is this is always going to matter to you. These are people you've elected to regulate your lives for good and ill. So it's a privilege to be working in tandem with Montana PBS. We also complement network news folks as well. Oftentimes during the legislative session, you know, the reporters are bouncing around the building, literally, and in and out. We're covering simultaneous things constantly, gavel to gavel. We always have the material that a reporter might need because they missed something. And we're very generous. I mean, you know, it's a public good. We're happy to supply people with footage when they need it. And we've also sent footage to C-SPAN in Washington, D.C. When the governor was inaugurated the first time. That was a popular show on C-SPAN. Now, just briefly, how we came to pass. In 1999, 2001, this building was completely and utterly renovated, with a few exceptions like this room and the House chamber. State government, everybody in this building was moved out for a year and a half. There were bulldozers on the first floor, just going through a complete redo to remake the Capitol into what it is now, which is an exact replica of what it was when it was first built. First Capitol with the elevators and running water and this beautiful, beautiful artwork. Well, at the time, the design called for, some new technology, perhaps. And I worked for the legislature then. I was interested in what was going on, and I went to a meeting. I won't go into all the details, but we went to a meeting, and they were talking about raceways to carry network cabling and coax cabling. And that was the moment when it occurred to me, you build the plant, we'll make the music. So the building came equipped with miles and miles of cable going to all these various drops, but nothing to generate programming except some really clunky machinery that had to be trashed within the first year that the Capitol was reopened. So from that point forward, Helena Civic Television was just coming into its health, let's put it that way. We were growing healthy. The Legislative Council, which is a bipartisan group of leadership, decided, let's look at the feasibility of a C-SPAN type operation here. Just look at it. I was happily the one assigned to that task, wrote a report, visited some other states, Washington State, Minnesota, looked at other models. It was still kind of a wild idea. Came back, wrote a report. They liked the report. They say, draft a bill. Well, I drafted the bill. And little did I know that it would pass the legislature, and it had provisions in it for a competitive bid. Who will come and do this? Well, my friends at HCTV were uniquely positioned to compete for that and won the bid. For the first year or so, we had cameras in the Senate and mobile carts moving in and out of hearing rooms. Very obtrusive. But the legislature, to their credit, was seeing, okay, there might be some value in this. We were only telecasting, and I can't say broadcasting because it wasn't over the air. I had to learn, a telecast is a telecast, broadcast is something else. Well, we were reaching the people of Helena. Well, long story short, we went from a couple of carts and cameras in the Senate and a Speaker of the House who told me in no uncertain terms, very powerful man, smart lawyer guy, he ran this place. He looked me in the eye, and having heard me say, well, we're planning on a C-SPAN type operation, he said, there will never, ever be cameras, television cameras in the House chamber. And I think he said little man. Okay, 2 years later, there's 3 cameras in the House chamber, and we're about to launch into HD conversion, so we won that one. Anyway, we started out with one channel, one community served. We grew that through just private fundraising and a little bit of support from lobbyist fees collected by the state to a 7-city mini network. The 7 largest cities were getting TVMT. From there, by hook and crook, the legislature finally was convinced. Why should only the people of Billings, Missoula, Bozeman, Helena, and Great Falls, why are they the only ones who get to see this? What about my constituents? In Havre, Plentywood, Scobie, all the small places that you guys know. So in a fateful decision one day, and I was witness to that, they decided, there's just no good reason why everybody shouldn't get this. The people deserve to get this. And that was what created the funding understructure, the infrastructure to provide for distribution across the state. So Helena Civic Television is paid through a multi-year contract to produce the content. The citizens of the state are paying for the transmission and distribution. And I would just add a couple more things. It's that we don't just televise government. We have the freedom, and I enjoy it greatly, to make documentaries, to work with state agencies like the Historical Society on documentary series. We've produced programs about historical figures that no one knew about, except a few experts like Louis Riel, incredibly important character in Montana history. We've covered all the Wheeler Center conferences and put them on TV, another long-form format that otherwise people who don't go to those conferences would never know what was going on at the Wheeler Center. And not least, another unique attribute of TVMT is we're the only producing entity importing from a foreign country the proceedings of their legislature. So when our legislature is not in session and the Alberta Legislative Assembly is, we bring that in by satellite and present that to the people of Montana. And we're not done with that because, in my mind, we should be looking at Saskatchewan and British Columbia and knowing what our friends and neighbors are doing. And I'll end on that. What's so fascinating about watching another country's government at work is it's a British parliamentary system in Canada. They have a completely different way of conducting their business, and they only telecast the question time, which is the action time when all the opposition gets to question the government. So you're looking at about 100 people in Alberta. It's a multicultural society. There are people from all over the planet in Alberta. They're conducting their business in this British style, and yet everything they're talking about is relevant to what we talk about in Montana, increasingly so. So I'm kind of going full circle to my little Canadianist roots here, and I'm proud of being able to bring in Alberta. I hope we can do more, and I think that takes care of it for me, other than to kind of reiterate that I've heard so many positive comments about the return to local, the importance of local news, local sports, local weather, and that's really the future as well as the past of the broadcast media. Well, we are hyper-local as public access, and we're kind of living or making manifest the idea that Montana is a really, really big small town. It's a little town with long streets, and we want to reach the entire state with our long-form programming. Thank you.
I think that as public broadcasters, we are about connection, just as commercial broadcasters are about connections. And I think Ron's comments about the mom and pop stations that will win out in the end, and Bill Whitsitt reading Joe Sample's really eloquent letter about what it means to make sure that Montanans are connected to each other and to their government and to the news that's happening. We know in Montana Public Radio, people tune to us primarily for news, whether it's from the BBC or NPR or American Public Media, or especially our local news. And we have, our roots are in the School of Journalism. We take our journalism very seriously and have been able to expand with the assistance of the Greater Montana Foundation over the years, a larger local footprint rather than just being a Missoula station that talks about Missoula news. And it's increasingly important. It's increasingly important in the online world where people have a choice of any radio station in the world. They tune to us because we're local and they want to hear what we have to say.
One thing I guess I would add is I think an example of the local, how interested, I mean, it is all about local for us, and yet national too. I mean, we love Downton Abbey just like everybody else, but you might watch Downton Abbey, but it might be Ag Live before that, or our Antiques Roadshow last Monday, and watching Glacier Park's Night of the Grizzlies. One of the things that we can do, and it's really important for us, for our Montana audience, is to present the best of national content and also the very best of local content, and our schedule is a really good mix of all of that. We are broadcasting, as William mentioned before, 5 channels right now. The beauty of digital television, who would have thunk that we could broadcast 5 channels in the same space that we used to broadcast 1. We have 1 high-definition channel, the Montana PBS HD. That is the channel that I schedule primarily. I'm working on the August schedule right now, crafting it with programming from the BBC and many different sources that we acquire from, not just PBS. We also have a kids channel, 24/7, that we schedule locally from PBS programming, American Public Television, other children's providers, and we schedule that locally 24/7, children's channel, Montana PBS Kids. That's available over the air. It's also available on the cable system of the state of Montana. Not yet on Dish and Direct. Not sure that'll ever happen, but it'd be nice. We also carry Montana PBS World, which is a news public affairs channel. If you've ever tuned into that, it has NewsHour, Frontline, and other documentaries. Some of our local documentaries have ended up on the national schedule. That is a package service that I subscribe to, so that's Montana PBS World. There's Montana PBS Create, which is how-to lifestyles 24/7. That's a package channel. All of these are SD channels. And then, of course, the TVMT broadcast we carry as our 5th channel. So those are the 5, 1 HD and 4 SD channels. So maybe I ought to stop there. I don't know if we want to take questions or...
Yeah, I just want to talk, Randy? Okay. I want to talk a bit about Montana Public Media as... Okay. MontanaPublicMedia.org is a website that resulted from the collaboration of YPR, MTPR, Montana PBS, and the UM School of Journalism. We did that last year because we knew we were all going to be doing election coverage. And we thought, we need one place where we can aggregate all of this content to show what Montana Public Broadcasting can do for the state of Montana, the kinds of programmings that we bring forward. And again, with the help of the Greater Montana Foundation, we were able to hire someone, a half-time person, who created MontanaPublicMedia.org. And through the election year, we had all of our programming there. Again, with the support of the foundation, we were able to extend that into the legislative session. And by mid-session, there was a daily digest page where you could go and in one place find every newspaper article that had been written about the legislature the day before, every radio report that had been done by public media folks, the TV pieces, the journalism that the students were doing for local radio stations around the state, supported by the MBA and GMF, and also the print pieces that the journalism students were writing. All of that in one place. And that kind of collaboration, I think, will go forward with other topics that we're working on to try to bring that kind of power, that kind of concentrated focus on issues, again, to connect people to each other and to the topics that we all need to discuss together. The most recent one was Guns Under the Big Sky, where we started out with a student documentary about gun culture in Montana, and followed that with a live radio panel discussion about gun control, called it Knee Jerk or Necessary. And then finally, we had a live town hall meeting on television, broadcast on radio as well, about school safety. And how do you handle the changing regulations and need for safety and process in the schools in Montana. And again, it came because we thought, we have these different partners to bring together to make an important series. So that's the kind of thing that we want to do in the future. Again, the Greater Montana Foundation has been supportive of so many of the programs that we do. They're an original supporter for Backroads of Montana, and I'll always appreciate that very first trust in what we do. Be happy to answer questions, or Dan. Dan said that not only are we a source for news, but we're the only source for classical music. And that's true, and that's a very important part of what we do. And every morning at 9 o'clock on both Yellowstone Public Radio and Montana Public Radio, you can tune out the day's news and just relax with some classical music and think about what has happened earlier. He also asked about the dream that we have for what we want to be in the future, and also some of the challenges in funding and recognition that we face. You want to talk about the vision thing for a minute, and I'll think about these others?
Yeah.
I'll talk vision too, but.
Well, I tend to be the closest to the storytelling side in terms of creating a Montana PBS broadcast schedule, picking the best things from national schedules, picking things from other broadcasters around the system. But one of the great joys I have is in working with independent producers in our communities, and it's something that I enjoy doing every day, but there's a lot of great stories, a lot of great filmmakers in our communities. It's just incredible how many great film ideas and projects come, and I know you've seen a bunch of them in the yesterday, but we see a lot of them as well, and we don't have the resources to help all of them, to work with them. We kind of pick and choose the ones that we can. But as a programmer, I would, many of these ideas, these Montana stories, Montana history stories, Montana public affairs, other kinds of things like that, I would love to make place for, and I have room for in our Montana PBS schedule. And I think more and more local stories. I build a schedule every month, and if you look at our program guide, the first 2 pages are devoted to Montana programs. And we repeat a lot of our programs, so in case you've missed Class C the first time, you'll have many chances over the years. But it's wonderful to be able to have new content every month. And as much as I'm pleased to say that we oftentimes do, I also go for July and August and September. I might not have too much new content. I kind of rely going on back to old programs like Montana Mosaics that the Historical Society helped out with a long time ago. And so my hope is that we would have the resources in the future, both fiscal and personnel resources, to do more of these Montana stories. Clearly the C.M. Russell Project is one we're excited about, but it's just one of many great Montana stories. So from my one very kind of narrow focus in terms of Montana storytelling, I would love to have the resources and personnel, and we are growing at both stations. I'd say growing, but very slowly. FTE, adding FTE to produce programs is a very hard thing to do at the universities. And So therefore, we do a lot of these collaborations with independents, and that's been great. They require a lot of work, but hopefully we'll do more of those.
For me, I'm going to retire in a couple of years, so I'm thinking a lot about the vision thing and what I should tell people as I leave. But I agree with Ron that radio really isn't going anywhere. It's always going to be the kind of fabric that connects people in a community. It's where people will tune in to find out what emergency is going on, what thunderstorm is on the way. It is the place where people are going to get that essential information. For Montana Public Radio, we've always tried to remain locally focused. We could tune into all of the different programs that are offered on the satellite from public broadcasters around the country. About 50% of what we put on the air is locally produced. And yes, that may be someone sitting in the control room spinning records, but that person walked to the station that morning and was in the same snowstorm or brilliant spring morning that the people listening in that community were in. And I think you really need that kind of local touch. Public radio and public television, I think, have to remain consistently interesting and engaging and challenging to people. I think that we need to be a force for civility in our civic dialogue. I think that we are perfectly positioned to take that kind of role in an electronic sense. We are a convener, we are the largest town square, we're the largest classroom, we're the largest stage in Montana. And that is an incredible opportunity and an incredible challenge for us to rise up to. As far as the support we get from internally, the university system, I think they, with the success that we've had with programming, the response that we get from members, we raise over $2 million in individual membership from people across the state, across Montana Public Media. That gets attention, and the administrative high end at both universities are very supportive of what we do. They understand not only that we are a great public service and promotion for the university system, but they also understand the editorial integrity that must be maintained in the news operations. And whenever I get a new boss, it's the first thing I sit down and talk about is we have these news operations. We are not the public relations arm of the university. We are a news organization. And to a person, they've said, I got it, I understand. And I think that is a real commitment to an understanding of what we can do and the integrity that we have built over the years and how we every day have to make sure that we protect that. So that's just some thoughts.
Well, actually, I would like to answer a different question that no one's asked or spoken to yet, but I know we're running short of time. But there is a different kind of vision that we all have to wrestle with. And I know there's been a lot of reminiscing over the last day and a half about, the hardware, the sound booths, the recording equipment, and all that. We are all challenged, at least in television, to meet the next test of the market, which is to convert everything to high definition. And it's, at least in my world, it's a daunting challenge. It's very expensive. It's very complicated. It's a different form of production. And the provision of high definition channels is going to be incredibly important, because if we're forced by the marketplace and technology to convert everything to high definition production and no one can see it, we've got a problem. So I just throw that out as, you all in the years past faced a lot of technological hurdles, and we're up against another one right now. There's someone dying to ask a question in the back.
It's very important. Thank you. For the camera. What we should have included in our conversation is the efforts that are going on for 3 tribal stations. KGVA, which is in Fort Belknap, and the 2 others, I'm only familiar with KGVA. The City of Browning has, and and the Rocky Boy. I'm familiar with KGVA because we did a story about them on Backroads, and it is the communication, not the only one certainly, but a very important communication system for the reservation, where people 35 miles out in the middle of nowhere can be connected to each other for birthdays or ceremonies or listening to native language. It's a very important social entity for those the reservations.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And thank you, gentlemen, for the extraordinary. We are running just a few minutes late. Why don't we take a 15-minute break? We'll be back here instead of 15 minutes after 3. We'll be back here at 20 minutes after 3. And we'll wrap up with our last session.